Welcome back to Chapter 13 of my Fire Emblem Engage LTC run. This is the first of the 3 most staff-heavy chapters in the run, all being played back to back. This map is very large, has Fog of War, and one of the lowest deployment limits in the game. But perhaps the biggest challenge is killing the bosses. This chapter has 2 bosses that are both bulky and hit like a truck. We need to escort 1 boss killer and 1 lane user to defeat them, with everyone else playing a supportive role. Almost our entire team is composed of staff users, most of them for using mobility staves. The sole exception is Diamant. Her reclasses to Sniper to use 20 range Astrostorm. This can also be done with Zelkov, who is already in a covert class, but Diamant's access to Canter enables him to get far enough to attack without additional staff support. Staff usage during this part of the game is so constrained that this decision to use a Canter Sniper was actually necessary in the end. In this map we need warp pieces to warp other warpers to get our units across, essentially creating a short chain of staff users sort of like we did back in Chapter 11. This is also the first map where we use the rescue staff, which can give us additional movement compared to warp by having Pandura move forward and rescue units to him. Aside from that, we get 3 new units that conveniently spawn further ahead than the rest of our team. Of the 3, Panette is by far the most important, and she will be our 4th major EXP target for the rest of the game. Marin and Tamara are not as important, but they can perform various filler roles. In this map, all 3 of them will help clear the path for Ivy. Ivy will be the main combat carry in this map, as well as the vast majority of maps for the remainder of the run, for so many reasons, but it is mainly due to her strong range combat and mobility. In this map in particular, she can march on ahead of rewarp uses on top of receiving warp and rescue uses from other units, letting her reach the bosses very quickly. For most of the game, her ability to use staves is actually not that relevant because she prefers to attack instead. While she has strong offense on this map, her survivability is not hugely reliable. She can survive like 1 hit and some chain attacks and must dodge virtually everything else. She also faces a couple small crit rates. It is especially important that she dodges this attack from the Iron Blade, as it would knock her back 1 space and she would fail to reach the bosses next turn. On the flip side, she has a 100 hit against nearly every target thanks to the Lucina engraved Bolganone. Combat for the rest of the team is mostly fine, though Citrine dodges 1 enemy for extra XP. On turn 2, Ivy needs to rewarp again to enter the boss's attack range. However, the fog prevents her from doing that on her own, so we need to send someone with a torch to light up the path for her. Since Marin is the next furthest unit, we will have Alir pass the torch to her so she can do it. Alir then uses drawback to pull her further, but that alone is not enough, so we will have Citrine warp her as well. We perform a small trade chain here to pass the second warp staff from Fram to Citrine, allowing us to end with 1+4 separate uses of warp, as opposed to 2+3. We also freeze the Swordmaster again, as we're not quite able to exit his attack range yet. Citrine then needs to be rescued forward by Pandreo in order to reach and warp Marin. Warping her there with Lapis is also an option, but at the time I thought I would need all 5 warp uses later. While Citrine is there, she can farm some XP from a nearby flyer. Her current goal is to hit level 7 Sage by Chapter 16, which, given her current XP, is an underestimate. She is, and will basically always remain underleveled relative to the enemies on the map, causing her to gain XP very rapidly. As a result, I raised her target level to 8 and tried feeding her XP even more aggressively past this point. After all that, Marin moves ahead just enough to light up a path for Ivy, while also equipping a Makai engrave to survive the incoming enemy phase. She ends the turn exposed to a chain attack from the Swordmaster, but enemies on this map actually don't care about chain attacks beyond expected damage, so they tend to go for Ivy instead. As a result, Ivy faces a fairly dangerous enemy phase this turn, being attacked by both bosses and 2 regular enemies. Her combat benchmarks for these bosses are 41 magic attack and 22 attack speed. She can't use the Lin Ring because Diamant needs it, so the next best thing is the Ossian S Ring, which gives her effectively 3 attack speed by negating the weight penalty of Bolganone. This gives her enough attack to one round the Brave Axe boss, but not the Tomahawk boss. Even with heavy rigging, we are unable to afford a strong enough forge to one round him, and even if we could, it would be substantially less reliable as we need a Sigurd engrave as opposed to Lucina engrave. That's where Diamant comes in. He can use Astrostorm to chip the boss, enabling Ivy to finish him off on turn 3 enemy phase. He needs 22 attack to deal sufficient chip damage to the boss, which is pretty easy even for a scrub like Diamant. Now that Ivy is engaging the bosses, the rest of the team is focused on farming XP and surviving enemy phase. One of the enemies ignores both Marin and Ivy despite a chain attack opportunity, possibly due to an AI that prioritizes raiding the villages over combat. Speaking of which, this map has 2 villages. Well, technically 3, but in practice 2. The nearest village just contains a Seraph robe, while the other village contains what is normally the first obtainable rescue staff. It's located at the bottom left corner of the map, which is very far out of the way for us. Obtaining it is probably impossible in a 3-turn clear, as our team is too busy transporting Ivy to the bosses, so we skip it and continue to rely on rescue staves from the well instead. The rest of the turn is spent farming some XP and moving units out of danger. Panette essentially starts her training arc here, as she will spend quite a few levels in Berserker in order to accrue as much strength as possible. She needs good damage in general, but in this run she has to meet an obscenely high damage benchmark later on. One fun fact about this run is that a major point of contention was whether or not to train Tamara for this role instead. While she is often considered one of the weakest units in the game, her unique access to Sandstorm gives her one of the highest damage ceilings of any unit. In the end, I didn't go for it because I wasn't confident in managing her XP gain on top of everyone else's. Ironically, it may be more worth investigating in a run without paralogs, as Panette is fairly dependent on paralog resources to function in the late game. Despite that, the payoff for training Panette is much higher for us thanks to her more consistent damage output and crit rates. Diamant now finally gets to ship the Tomahawk boss, taking a fairly inefficient route to target him. After Panette and Diamant see combat, our other units need to move out of possible danger. While the bosses tend to move pretty early, I'm not 100% confident that they will move prior to some of the enemies in the top left, such as the Swordmaster or possible flyers hidden in the fog. Ivy's enemy phase on turn 3 is still pretty dangerous. In addition to the 2 bosses, she also faces an Elwyn mage and ideally dodges them as well. If nothing else, at least the bosses move before the nearby sword flyer, who is more accurate and would pose a significant threat to Ivy. She barely survives Tochi's attack and counterkills him, ending the map in 3 turns.